The maritime twilight in San Diego arrived not with a sunset, but with a creeping, salt-heavy fog that swallowed the harbor in a muted gray shroud. It was a cold, rhythmic world where the only sounds were the distant, mournful cries of gulls and the patient slapping of the tide against the ancient, barnacle-encrusted pilings of the pier. Moving through this haze was Jack Miller. At 38, Jack was a man built of hard angles and heavy silences. His presence didn't ask for permission. It simply occupied space with the weight of a seasoned veteran. He wore a faded navy jacket that had survived nearly as many winters as he had, and his face bore the marks of a life lived at the edge of the world. A jaw shadowed by a rough beard and a nose that had been broken long ago and never quite forgiven the trauma. His eyes, a piercing steel blue, were always scanning, always alert, yet they held a weariness that suggested they had seen more than any one person should ever have to carry. Once a member of the elite Navy SEALs, Jack had transitioned into a life of solitude, following a disastrous mission on the Pacific Rim that had cost him his entire team. He didn't speak much anymore. He had learned that silence was the only way to keep the ghosts of his past from waking. Walking with a disciplined gait at his side was Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd. Rex was a massive animal, even for his breed, with a thick sable coat marked by a dark stripe along his spine. He wasn't just a pet. He was Jack's former K-9 partner, a fellow soldier who carried his own scars. A small notch in one ear from shrapnel and hidden patches of thickened skin beneath his fur. Rex mirrored Jack's temperament. He was economical in his movements and unervingly intelligent. As they reached the far, desolate end of the wooden pier where the harbor lights grew dim, Rex did something unexpected. He didn't just stop. He stilled with a profound, sudden intent. His ears pricked forward, and his nose worked the damp air, catching a scent that Jack's human senses could not detect. It wasn't the scent of a threat, but something far more fragile. A mixture of profound loneliness and quiet fear. Jack followed the dog's gaze. There, sitting dangerously close to the edge of the drop-off, was a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. This was Lily Carter, though Jack didn't know her name yet. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her thin frame swallowed by an oversized gray hoodie. Her chestnut hair was messy, escaping a lopsided ponytail, and her face was a map of sun-kissed freckles over pale, tired skin. She wasn't crying. She was simply watching the dark water with an expression of waiting that felt far too heavy for a child. Rex moved first. He didn't lunge or bark. Instead, he approached with a slow, low-tailed gait that signaled peace. He sat a few feet away, then gradually lowered himself until his chin rested on the wooden boards between them. Lily didn't flinch. Slowly, as if testing the air, she reached out her small, trembling fingers and brushed the dog's thick fur. In that moment, the icy wall Jack had built around his heart for years suffered its first hairline fracture. The quiet was shattered by the sharp, echoing sound of boots on wood. Through the fog, a woman appeared, her face tight with a mixture of terror and professional steel. Sarah Whitman was a child services caseworker who had spent too many years in the system to expect happy endings. She had been searching for Lily for 2 hours since the girl had vanished from a local shelter. "Step away from the child." Sarah's voice cracked through the mist, sharp with the instinct to protect. She saw Jack's size, his scars, and the powerful dog, and she immediately braced for the worst. The air grew thick with tension. Authorities began to circle the area, their radios crackling and flashlights cutting through the fog. A command was given to the dog, the kind of sharp order a trained military animal is supposed to obey instantly. But Rex did something that shocked everyone present. He didn't move. He didn't growl. He simply remained where he was, leaning his weight against the little girl, refusing to abandon the soul he had decided to protect. In that heavy, silent moment on the pier, the lives of a broken soldier, a lost child, and a loyal dog became inextricably linked. The harbor lights flickered to life, casting long, wavering reflections that danced like golden ghosts upon the churning water. The atmosphere on the pier remained brittle, a delicate standoff between the authorities and the scarred man with the unmoving dog. Sarah Whitman stood her ground, her posture a rigid line of professional defense. Yet she couldn't ignore the strange tranquility radiating from Rex. The animal wasn't acting as a weapon. He was acting as a shield. "He's not a threat," Jack said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the wooden planks. He kept his hands visible, palms open in a universal gesture of de-escalation. "He's a veteran. He knows when someone is hurting." Sarah's eyes flicked between the massive shepherd and the small girl. She noticed how Lily's fingers were buried deep in the dog's coat, and how the child's breathing had finally slowed to match the animal's steady rhythm. The caseworker's defensive edge softened, replaced by a weary curiosity. "She's been missing for hours," Sarah explained, her voice dropping an octave. "She slipped out of the transition center. She doesn't usually let anyone get this close." Before the conversation could go further, a new figure stepped out of the shadows of the harbor office. Thomas Reed, the veteran harbor master, approached with the slow, rhythmic gait of a man who had spent 40 years at sea. His hair was the color of a winter storm, and his skin was etched with the deep lines of a life lived in salt and wind. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze lingering on Rex. "That's a Navy dog," Thomas remarked, his voice like gravel. It wasn't a question. He looked at Jack with a nod of silent understanding. "The harbor has a long memory, son. It knows the difference between a stranger and a brother." Lily looked up then, her wide eyes searching Thomas's weathered face. "Does the harbor know where my dad is?" she asked. The question was so fragile it seemed the wind might blow it away. Sarah sighed, a sound of profound sadness. "Lily, we've talked about this." "Michael Carter," Lily whispered, ignoring the caseworker. "My dad is Michael Carter." The name hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He remembered the name from a dozen briefings: a Navy rescue swimmer, a man legendary for diving into storms that turned ships into toothpicks. They had never served in the same unit, but in the tight-knit world of special operations, Carter was a man you trusted with your life before you even met him. The heavy silence was interrupted by Daniel Price, a Coast Guard liaison who moved with a somber precision. He didn't look like a man bringing good news. He offered Jack a curt nod of recognition before turning to Sarah. "There's been an update on the Carter file," Daniel said, his expression carefully neutral to mask the weight of his words. "A civilian vessel found debris 70 miles south this morning. They recovered personal effects. An ID tag." The words were like stones dropped into a deep well. Lily's face went a ghostly shade of white, and she pressed herself harder against Rex's side. The dog let out a low, mournful sound. Not a growl, but a recognition of the grief vibrating through the air. "It doesn't mean everything is over," Daniel added quickly, though the lack of conviction in his voice was telling. "But it changes the search parameters." Sarah looked at the girl, then at the cold, clinical reality of the shelter system that awaited her. She saw Jack standing there, a man who understood the specific, jagged edges of military loss, and she made a decision that defied every rule in her handbook. "She can't go back to the center tonight," Sarah said, looking directly at Jack. "It's too loud, too impersonal. She needs someone who speaks the same language as her father." Jack looked down at Lily. He had spent years trying to stay unanchored, believing that if he didn't care for anyone, he couldn't lose anyone else. But as Rex looked up at him with those deep amber eyes, Jack realized that some missions aren't assigned by command. They are found in the mist. "She stays with us," Jack said firmly. The choice was made. As they turned to leave the pier, the echoes of the past seemed to follow them, no longer as haunting ghosts, but as the first whispers of a new, uncertain purpose. The morning light did not arrive with the cold uncertainty of the fog. Instead, it filtered softly through the thin curtains of Jack's coastal cottage, painting the walls in shades of pale gold. The house, a modest structure of weathered blue wood, had spent years as a silent sanctuary for a man who wanted to be forgotten. But today the air felt different. It smelled of coffee and wood smoke, and for the first time in a decade, the silence was not heavy. It was peaceful. Lily sat at the small kitchen table, her small frame nearly lost in one of Jack's old Navy hoodies. Her freckles, once hidden by the shadows of the pier, were bright in the daylight. At her feet, Rex lay sprawled across the linoleum, his thick tail thumping a rhythmic greeting every time she moved. The dog, usually a coiled spring of military readiness, finally looked like a creature at rest. He was no longer a soldier on watch. He was a companion at home. The quiet was broken by a gentle knock. Sarah Whitman and Daniel Price arrived together, their professional armor replaced by a somber, quiet respect. Daniel carried a manila folder, the weight of a man's life reduced to paper and ink. As they sat around the small table, the finality of the situation settled over them like a falling tide. "We have the confirmation," Daniel said, his voice soft but steady. He explained that Michael Carter's final acts were not of a man lost, but of a man giving everything. He had stayed behind to ensure others reached safety during the storm. He was a hero until the very last breath. Lily didn't cry out. She simply leaned down and buried her face in Rex's neck. The dog leaned back, a living anchor against the storm of her grief. Jack knelt beside her, his large, scarred hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Your father lived a life that mattered," he whispered, "and he loved you more than the sea." When Sarah spoke of the future, of the legalities and the long-term placements, the answer was already written in the way Rex refused to leave Lily's side and the way Jack stood over them both. "I'm not letting her go back into the system," Jack said, the words solid and unyielding. The paperwork would take time, but the decision was etched in stone. He had spent years running from the responsibility of living, but in this broken child, he had found his final, most important mission. Months passed, and the house by the sea transformed. The shadows of the past were replaced by the clutter of a life being rebuilt. Drawings on the fridge, a second toothbrush in the bath, and a dog bed moved to the foot of a young girl's bed. Jack, the man shaped by war, was being reshaped by the simple, profound act of caring for another. One clear evening, when the sky was a bruised purple and gold, the three of them returned to the pier. The fog was gone, the horizon sharp and endless. Lily stood at the edge, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. With a deep breath, she let them fall into the dark water, a silent goodbye to the father the ocean had claimed. Jack stood behind her, a steady silhouette against the fading light, while Rex sat alert and proud at their heels. As the stars began to pierce the velvet sky, Jack realized that home is not always a place you are born into. Sometimes, it is a place you build from the wreckage of a storm. Miracles, he understood now, rarely arrive with the sound of trumpets or a flash of light. More often, they come in the quiet of a harbor, through a chance meeting in the mist, or the unwavering loyalty of a heart that refuses to walk away. We often feel adrift, convinced that our stories have reached an ending we didn't choose. But like Jack and Lily, we are frequently standing on the threshold of a new chapter without even knowing it. Faith, kindness, and courage are the invisible threads that pull us back toward a purpose. Even in our darkest hours, we are never truly walking alone. There is always a hand to hold, a path to find, and a harbor waiting to welcome us home.